Many newspapers, television commentators, and educators call these young revolutionaries dissidents. The problem, they say, is simply one of student unrest.
During the 1960s, the political structures and ideals which held the United States together began to collapse under increasing skepticism, protest, and a series of military interventions that got increasingly out of hand and happened all over the world. In the early part of the decade, the city streets from Berkeley to Birmingham were filled to the brim with vast and symbolic nonviolent marches.
We're almost there.
All right, just pass them back. All right, I'll start on this side. All right, pass them down. You have any questions?
Wake up, girl.
Or anything that's bothering you? Be sure you contact your captains for anything, and they will take it from there. Do not try to do anything on your own, because the minute you do, you will be upsetting the purpose of this march. The whole thing is an orderly, conducted march.
These new social movements fought against discrimination of all kinds, against the war, for civil rights, and against their bosses.
They want no reservations. They want complete equality, social, economic, and political.
Often, however, they would march into the tips of bayonets and the arms of the law. For civil rights activists and ethnic minorities in these movements, marching would almost certainly be greeted by angry white citizens who'd probably be exercising their Second Amendment right.
Certainly do not and will not give protection to civil rights workers.
In the latter part of the decade, the government's inaction and repression, as well as the efforts of Presidents Eisenhower, JFK, and LBJ to use the military and federalized National Guard in order to desegregate, turned the civil rights movement into a violent conflict.
Sunday evening, when I flew down in a government plane to the airstrip at the University of Mississippi, and we had marshals already down there. We had about 400 or 500 marshals sworn in as from the prison guards, from the Border Patrol, from the U.S. Marshal Service, from any other place we could find reasonably trained law enforcement officers. And they were themselves an irritant to the students who were returning from a football weekend, and we had no place to sort of hide the marshals. We were around the Lyceum building, which was the center of the campus, and unbeknownst to us, a sort of a tradition and a place of great honor.
Students came, and of course, they saw the marshals. I know I got angry when I saw the marshals. It seemed a betrayal. It made me mad. You know, why are these people here? Well, we haven't done anything. And people have behaved themselves. And, you know, what is going on? And I caught myself really with some of these feelings.
After the marshals had secured their positions, James Meredith was flown into Oxford Airport and driven to a secret location at Ole Miss. The crowds didn't know where he was, but they knew he was on campus. And at 8 o'clock, just as the president went on the air, Ole Miss turned into a battlefield. Very few people heard the president's words.
Americans are free and sure to disagree with the law, but not to disobey it. For in a government of laws and not of men, no man, however prominent or powerful, and no mob, however unruly or boisterous, is entitled to defy a court of law. The eyes of the nation and all the world are upon you and upon all of us.
The marshals were ordered not to use guns against the rioters, who were shooting and throwing Molotov cocktails. And the rioters were targeting the media, smashing cameras and attacking reporters.
There was one freshman girl that had been this little flower of Southern gentility when I had met her. And she came up to me, and her face was absolutely contorted, and I almost didn't recognize her. And she was absolutely furious because she had picked up a brick and thrown it at a marshal, and it had only hit him in the head and scratched him, and she had not put his eye out.
Well, you see, we got to get order up there, and that's what we thought we were going to have. President, please, why don't you give an order of prayer to remove Mayor? How can I remove him, Governor, when there's a riot in the street, and he may step out of that building and something happen to him? I can't remove him under those conditions. People are wiring me and calling me saying, well, you've given up. I said, I had to say, no, I'm not giving up any fight.
Yeah, but we don't
I never give up. I have courage and faith, and we'll win this fight, you understand? That's just the Mississippi people.
Yeah, I understand, but I don't think anybody even in Mississippi or anyplace else wants a lot of people killed.
Oh, no.
That's what, Governor, that's the most important thing.
I'll issue any statement any time about peace and violence.
In 1964, in Mississippi alone, there were 80 beatings, 35 shootings, and 68 bombings or burnings of churches, businesses, and homes.
The Dixiecrats, who held dictatorial control over the South through voter intimidation and repression, authorized the creation of the State Sovereignty Commissions, or SOVCOMs, which had acted initially as propaganda outlets to improve the image of segregation. The SOVCOMs provided educational films and even invited journalists from the North and around the world on guided tours of model cities which were supposed to show the supposed racial harmony of the South.
Just as the pattern of segregation is evident in Forest, so too is the real interest both races have in each other's welfare.
We have far less crime in our race in Mississippi in proportion to the population than in any state in the nation.
It was a disaster, I think it's fair to say. The effort to convince the rest of the country that we were right on the issue of segregation was doomed to failure.
So the SOVCOMs began employing former FBI agents, highway patrolmen, and private investigators to spy on, threaten, and harass anyone they deemed a threat.
The most secret aspects of the Sovereignty Commission, of course, were the mechanics of their investigative process, of sending agents out and, in effect, spying on citizens of this state.
They were basically sending these letters to their employers. We just thought you'd like to know that teacher so-and-so has been involved in, civil rights activities or believed to have been involved. I mean, a lot of times these people weren't even involved in civil rights activities necessarily. They just happened to maybe be in certain place at a certain time, so therefore they assumed they were involved in civil rights activity, and they lost their jobs.
The Commission also maintained a paid network of spies and informers.
You had black people and white people working for the Sovereignty Commission, spying on their neighbors, spying on their friends. They would put pressure on black people, and especially middle-class black people, who were beholden to the system. That is, if you were a school teacher and your livelihood depended upon working for the county government or the city school system, you were forced so often to do things against your will.
The information, often gathered from illegal wiretaps and break-ins, was given to local law enforcement and white supremacist groups.
They also poured money in and even founded chapters of the White Citizens Council and the Klan. Recent declassified documents show the SOVCOMs were also involved in the murders of prominent civil rights activists Medgar Evers and Michael Schwerner, providing information, paying for legal defense, and even tampering with juries to make sure these killings remained disappearances.
Many prominent business leaders in the state and political leaders in the state were active members of the White Citizens Council, which was committed, totally committed to the maintenance of segregation in all forms.
I didn't think I was being watched. I was being watched. They were there till I went to bed at night, and they were there when I got up of the morning. 2 men in a suit in a car.
Mabel Worsham's life was shattered when members of the Sovereignty Commission heard she'd given birth to a baby fathered by a black man.
I had to let them in or they would kick my door in, especially because Mr. Ingram was wearing guns.
They examined the infant, wanting to know if he had mixed blood.
They looked at his hair and they looked at his fingernails.
They warned Worsham that if she didn't leave Grenada, she and her child might be found dead.
I was afraid. When somebody threatens to kill you, you know, and throw you in a river, chain you and throw you in the river, I think you'd be afraid too.
The Sovereignty Commission began investigating Reverend Germany in 1956. His first offense was inviting Negroes into his home for meals.
As the investigators go out to Horace Germany's farm and take the license plate of everyone who comes and goes there.
By 1959, the commission was secretly reading Germany's mail and had assigned an agent to shadow his house.
There was a time that Governor Ross Barnett had conveyed to the Attorney General Joe Patterson that he was to tell us, or tell my dad, that if he didn't get out of Mississippi in 24 hours that he would be killed. And it wasn't a veiled threat. It was an out-and-out threat. You either leave or you die.
2 weeks later, when Reverend Germany was in town, 20 men surrounded him.
And then these men just closed in on Daddy and they started beating him up. They had blackjacks, billy clubs, guns, and they hit him in the head, they hit him in the face, they knocked his teeth out. They knocked him on the ground and Daddy never struck back at him.
Despite his passionate defenses of nonviolence and his ostracization of perceived communists and radicals from the civil rights movement in order to maintain respectability, MLK was still labeled the most dangerous man in the country by the FBI. He was arrested more than 29 times in his life, but he was often bailed out of prison by Walter Reuther, the head of the United Auto Workers, one of the largest unions in the country. King and the other leaders of the new social movements realized that alone they would be crushed one by one, but together they just might prevail. King also began speaking out about his opposition to the Vietnam War and launched the Poor People's Campaign, which sought to unite the oppressed poor and workers of all colors in order to challenge the ever-increasing concentration of wealth that is inherent to capitalism.
The economic problem is probably the most serious problem confronting the Negro community, and I might say the most serious problem confronting poor people generally. And I don't want to be narrow about this, talking only about the black poor in our country, because I must be concerned about Puerto Ricans who are poor, Mexican Americans, American Indians, and Appalachian whites. And we are confronting a major depression in the poor community.
Black people and white poor people and red poor people and Puerto Rican poor people and Latin American Puerto Rican people of poor people of all descents, they had them caught up in their movements based on racism when the Black Panther Party stood up and said that we don't care what anybody says. We don't think you fight fire with fire best, we think you fight fire with water best. We're going to fight racism, not with racism, but we're going to fight with solidarity. We said we're not going to fight capitalism with black capitalism, but we're going to fight it with socialism. We stood up and said we're not going to fight reactionary pigs and reactionary state's attorneys like this and reactionary state's attorneys like Hanrahan with any other reactions on our part. We're going to fight their reactions where all of us people are getting together and have an international proletarian revolution. Right on.
Nonviolence has been a tremendous force in grappling with the social problem of legal segregation and the syndrome of deprivation surrounding that system. And of course it has been a major force in grappling with the political problem of the denial of the right to vote. But in winning victories like the Civil Rights Bill of '64 and the Voting Rights Bill of 1965 around the issue of segregation and voting rights, we discovered that these legislative strides did very little to improve the lot of the millions of Negroes in the ghettos of the North and in the nation generally. In other words, it did very little to penetrate the lower depths of Negro deprivation in communities all over.
From its inception, the FBI did everything it could to oppose the Poor People's Campaign. Fake stories were planted in newspapers, and the FBI began funneling large sums of money into TACT, or the Truth About Civil Turmoil. TACT had committees across the country which distributed pamphlets illustrating the lurid details of how it was actually the Kremlin, not rampant poverty, racism, or state violence, which was behind the riots and protests sweeping the nation. TACT, though funded by the FBI, was run by an independent organization known as the John Birch Society, which was a deeply anti-communist and conservative group of financiers, industrialists, businessmen, and suburbanites.
Faithful citizens are good friends of the American Republic, wherever you may be. To those who've been waiting to see the shape and color of my horns, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but my horns are retractable, and this is one of the occasions on which I've been able to make them completely disappear. The John Birch Society was founded in Indianapolis on December 9, 1958, by the 11 great Americans who met me there in the first of those two-day meetings to which I referred a moment ago. Most of those 11 men are today members of our council, which is the top governing body of the society. We are very proud of our council. Informally limited to 30 men, it has 27 members today, which is the highest number yet reached. And it has been remarked by many of our enemies as well as friends that it would be almost impossible to put together in one group a more imposing list of leaders in the American conservative movement. We must have associated with us, now and in the future, only men and women of goodwill, good conscience, and religious ideals. For we are striving to set an example by dedication, integrity, and purpose, in word and deed, which our children's children may follow without hesitation.
The Society, despite receiving government funding and only recruiting loyal citizens of the Republic, believed that a mysterious group known only as the Insiders were actually in control of the CIA, the KGB, President Eisenhower, NATO, the United Nations, the Supreme Court, the Democrats, the moderate Republicans, the Parent-Teacher Association, the media, the school system, and pretty much everything else. And they were using all these organizations to create a single totalitarian world government, which would span the globe. This global conspiracy, to Robert Welch and his council, was the most evil thing in the world, and therefore its influence had to be rooted out and destroyed, until only something purely American is left.
Have you ever heard of a thing called fluoridation? Fluoridation of water?
Yes, I have heard of that, Jack, yes. Yes.
Well, do you know what it is?
No. No, I don't know what it is now.
Do you realize that fluoridation is the most monstrously conceived and dangerous communist plot we have ever had to face?
As part of the Poor People's Campaign, MLK went to Memphis to support striking sanitation workers. There had already been several attempts on his life, so he felt it was necessary to hire some protection. He turned to a local group of left-wing black nationalist students who called themselves the Invaders. But unbeknownst to MLK or the Invaders themselves, informants from the FBI and the Memphis PD had already infiltrated their ranks. And on that fateful day, the Invaders were unable to protect him from his assassin, James Earl Ray. Ray was a convict with little to his name, aside from the meager earnings of his failed career as a porn director in Mexico. but he mysteriously came into possession of thousands of dollars, which he used to travel around the country in tracking the Poor People's Campaign. Ray had been corresponding with the John Birch Society in the months before the murder to plan an escape to Rhodesia, the last white colony.
When white America killed Dr. King last night, she opened the eyes for every black man in this country. When white America got rid of Marcus Garvey, she did it and she said he was an extremist. He was crazy. When they got rid of Brother Malcolm X, they said he was preaching hate. He deserved what he got. But when they got rid of Brother Martin Luther King, they had absolutely no reason to do so. He was the one man in our race who was trying to teach our people to have love, compassion, and mercy for what white people had done. When white America killed Dr. King last night, she declared war on us.
For 5 days, it was a battleground and a looter's paradise. Colored citizens clashed with police, National Guardsmen, and state troopers. 24 people were killed and 1,200 injured. Nearly half the city was in the grip of terror. The newer flare-ups sparked similar riots in other American centers, with hatred near danger point between white and black extremist groups. In Newark, there was an uneasy tension, punctuated by minor outbreaks of violence after 5 days of bloody fighting. From rooftops and windows, snipers picked their targets. The toll of dead and injured tells its own tragic story. Damage runs into millions of dollars. With the coming of the long, hot summers, for 3 years, America has had to face the tragic consequences of riots stemming from the slums of cities stretching right across the nation.
I hope that you can see here this about the New York. And President Johnson said American citizens have a right to protection of life and limb, whether driving along a highway in Georgia, a road in Mississippi, or a street in New York. Look at the clubs raised by the policemen hitting demonstrators in New York. I want to show you a picture here from the Philadelphia route. Look at the clubs there, and look at people on the ground being beaten. Can you see that? I hope that you will just look at that.
Governor, I'd like to pursue that point with you just a moment if I could.
I'm going to show this, though, because we've had a lot of distortion in this country. Look at the drawn pistols here in New York, where they're shooting over the heads of the demonstrators. Suppose there'd been any shots over the demonstrators the other day. They're talking about using horses. Now, I'm against violence, and I'm just as sorry that anybody got hurt. They talk about Cossacks. Look at all these Cossacks here, so-called. Look at these horsemen running down people in the city of New York. There they are. That's not Selma, Alabama. That's New York. And I have other pictures here, and I challenge this network themselves to run the film of the stopping of demonstrations in every city in this United States and let the American people judge for themselves.
Governor, you referred to Philadelphia and to New York as riots. You think that the situation that existed on this side of the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Sunday was a riot? The Negroes were standing in a line waiting and asking to have a word with your troopers, sir.
Mr. Benton, and I want to say again that my orders have always been to use a minimum amount of force. No force if necessary.
Troopers here, advance toward the group.
See that they disperse.
For goodness sakes, don't let anybody get hurt. I've said that over and over and over. That's all.
Was the amount of force used last Sunday the minimum required?
Was it the minimum required? That matter at the present time, as a result of the charges of police brutality, is under investigation, but I'm not going to be stampeded or blackjacked, as Mr. Johnson said, into making any accusations against the police because some outside agitators themselves have accused us of police brutality. Because clubs were used on Pennsylvania Avenue the other day in clearing the street of people who lay down for 30 minutes.
Well, I want to tell you, if you'll elect me the president and I go to California, or I come to Arkansas and some of them lie down in front of my automobile, it'll be the last one they'll ever want to lie down in front of.
In the aftermath of the Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King was in a coffin, while Governor Wallace, his arch-rival, was running for president with support of millions of white Americans, both in his home state and across the country.
Well, I really think that he should be on the ballot. He's the only man I know of anywhere in the country that's ever gone around not be afraid to say what he thinks and stands up for what's right.
And he does what he says he will do. That means a lot to the people of the United States. If he promises something, he does it.
Lou, what do you think if he does decide to run and runs? I think he's, of course, the national ticket's going to try to keep him off, but what would you think about him running as an independent? What do you think along that line?
I think that he has a good chance regardless of what ticket he runs on.
Wallace's meteoric rise to power began in 1958 when he ran for governor in the all-white Democratic primary in Alabama, the only political contest in the one-party state. Wallace promised to end the literacy tests which barred blacks and poor whites from voting, and he was also endorsed by the NAACP. As a judge, he had been favorable to black sharecroppers in their dealings with cotton companies, and he was far and away the most progressive candidate in the running. However, he was defeated in a landslide by the tough-on-crime Attorney General Malcolm Patterson, who was endorsed by the Ku Klux Klan.
Today, I have stood where once Jefferson Davis stood and took an oath to my people. It is very appropriate that from this cradle of the Confederacy, this very heart of the great Anglo-Saxon Southland, that today we sound the drum for freedom, as have our generation of forebears before us done time and again down through history. Let us rise to the call of freedom-loving blood that is in us and send our answer to the tyranny that clanks its chains upon the South. In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Put a smile upon your face as if there's nothing wrong. Think about a good time had a long time ago. Think about forgetting about your worries and your...
The Wallace victory in California did not come easy. When George Wallace brought his Southern-styled campaign to California, he baffled many by what seemed to be too much that did not relate directly to California. Southern traditions and national issues have in the past appeared too much at opposite poles.
Just a minute. Just a
I am
minute.
the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. I am here to accompanied by the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama and by the Marshal for the Northern District of Alabama. And I have with me here a proclamation signed by the President of the United States, which calls upon you to cease obstruction to justice in this state. The proclamation, Governor, was signed by the President within the last hour.
As Governor and Chief Magistrate of the state of Alabama, I deem it to be my solemn obligation and duty to stand before you, representing the rights and sovereignty of this state and its peoples. The unwelcomed, unwanted, unwarranted, and force-induced intrusion upon the campus of the University of Alabama today of the might of the central government offers frightful example of the oppression of the rights, privileges, and sovereignty of this state by officers of the federal government.
Governor, you still remember almost city by city the crowds of last year, don't you?
Yes, sir. We had tremendous crowd, larger than the other candidates in Detroit and Chicago and Cleveland and Youngstown and
Madison Square Garden.
Madison Square Garden and
Well, I think that the Negro, no doubt about it, has got out of hand. And I think Wallace will enforce law and order. And this is one thing that the people are concerned about. Now, there's no doubt about it that they have burned down Detroit. They've burnt down the east side over here. And anybody that would say that this is not a problem would be naive.
When you read stories about difficulties, riots in Omaha or Cleveland or Brooklyn or Chicago or wherever.
I call them rebellions.
They're rebellions. And you see nothing wrong with them?
I think that it is people who are rebelling against a system that has locked them inside tight of ghettos, that exploits and oppresses them, and they have no means of redress to break that system down.
Well, you let the police enforce the law and the National Guard enforce the law in a place like they know how to do, and you may have some things set on fire, but I tell you what, they wouldn't be, you'd have folks scurrying for cover because they know that if they got caught, it's the last of them.
You're saying that the only protection for black people is that they unite, so that when one black man is touched, because he's black, there's some protection for him. Now, it's obvious that that protection does not exist in this country. It does not now exist. And the only people who can have that protection are black people. And black people know that. Now, white people may not know that. So it means that you have to build a movement so strong in this country that if one black man is touched, every black man will rise up and let this country know they're not going to tolerate it.
If one black man is touched.
That's right, because he's black. I mean, if a black man is walking down the streets of Mississippi, down a highway with a Bible in his hand, he is shot because he is black.
That's one incident.
Oh, but I can name you a lot of others, and you know that yourself.
In the northern ghettos,
if one black man in California is driving his pregnant wife to the hospital and he is shot by a white racist policeman, I can name you more incidents.
You got to enforce the law. When people are tired and sick of anarchists going out here and saying we had a reason to seriously affect the internal security of this country. And you can that could and they know it. It could affect the external security of this country. This country could fall and become a fifth-rate power by anarchy in the large cities of this nation because law enforcement personnel are not allowed to enforce the law.
Wallace's campaign for president quickly became a magnet for the most virulent elements of the far right. The Citizens' Councils, the KKK, the Dixiecrats, James Earl Ray himself, and the John Birch Society united under the banner of Wallace. Meanwhile, his youth wing became wholly run and organized by neo-Nazis.
What is left? Only the biological fact of race, the yet discernible vestiges of our culture, and the yet fresh memories of what we were not long ago. Those are all that we have left from which to create, if we can, a new nation to replace what we lost. It is, I know, sad and painful that we have lost so much that we cherished and loved. But we cannot undo the past by wishing or pretending.
Especially as native Alabamians particularly, we are proud of George Wallace, and we also think he's a very capable man, and he has done so much for our state. He has raised the educational level, and just overall, we think that he's the man for the job.
Well, this is our world. We're the ones to inherit this world. And George Wallace, Lyndon Johnson, Ronald Reagan, Romney, the rest of them will pass on. They'll leave it to us. And so what they make will be what they leave to us.
You're living in a restless generation. There's discontent and fighting everywhere. We need a real strong man to run this nation. So it's up to you and me to put George there. Let's put George Wallace in the White House. Let's let him get those judges by the tail. tiger.
Vote of California. And if 4 or more parties run, you could mathematically win on 26% of the vote. And so that has led Senator Dirksen to say the other day that because of this third party movement that might spring up, we may have to change the electoral system before next year. So at least you and me have got them talking about changing the Constitution already. It's already had that much force and effect and impact upon the leaders of our 2 national parties today.
Why are more and more millions of Americans turning to Governor Wallace? Follow as your children are bused across town.
Don't let somebody 3,000 miles away sit down and write every guideline for the education of your child. That's all we're talking about. And we had a case last year that arose in Alabama, and we have freedom of choice in our state, in which you can choose to go to any school you want to go to, regardless of your race. But last year, the Justice Department filed a suit and said not enough people on this side of Torrance chose to go to school on this side, and not enough people on this side chose to go to this side of town. Not enough people in Auburn, Alabama chose to go across town to school, and vice versa. And we said to the Justice Department, but they could have chosen if they wanted to. What are we going to do about it? Make them go? And their answer was, that's your problem. You work it out.
Why are more and more millions of Americans turning to Governor Wallace? Watch your hard-earned tax dollars sail away to anti-American countries.
As president, I will halt the giveaway of your American dollars and products to those nations that aid our enemies.
Today, our culture has been so covered with alien slime that crude daubs, scarcely worthy of a schizophrenic child, pass for art. The raucous noises of savages pass for music. The filthy maunderings of an oriental degenerate pass for mental health. And grown men and women, who presumably no longer believe in Santa Claus and Cinderella, listen seriously to fairy tales about world peace and united nations. And our manhood and self-respect have been so completely leached away that, to name but one instance, the American people, like a herd of mindless sheep, watch stolidly while their enemies in Washington set up the Pueblo for capture.
We are winning in this fight because we are awakening the American people to the dangers that we have spoken about so many times, which is so evident today, the trend toward military dictatorship in this country. We shall now return to Montgomery for the purpose of continuing this fight, this constitutional fight, because we are winning. We shall continue to work for a better Alabama for all the people of this state, both white and Negro. And it is my prayer that God above shall bless all the people of this state, both white and black.
This, then, is the moment when Governor George Wallace of Alabama walked away from the schoolhouse door.
Well, I would just like to say that I'm glad that the registration is over and everything is over now. I think we can get down to studying. This is our main purpose here, and I'm glad that it has all been over now, and all we have to do now is get down, go get our books, and start studying. That's all.
Well, I'd like to say that at this time, this is our first and final press conference. And we'd like to say that we are very happy to note that our registration has taken place without incident. And we hope that we will be able to get on to our main purpose for being here, and that is to get an education. And this is our final statement.
And I believe George Wallace is the type of man that will leave to this country a world we can be proud of. Not a world that they'd like for you to believe where there's prejudice and bias for a man. I've never hated another man in my whole life, just pure hating because I don't even know him.
The news media has played a person like myself up who's been honest about race relations, has been a racist. I'm not a racist. I want to see the American dream further fulfilled of a better life and peace and prosperity for people of all races and colors in this country. And so I worried about the fact that the news media had brought about, through its distorted statements about me and the people of Alabama, some ill feeling by certain groups of people. Now, the subversive element in this country despised Mr. Nixon, Mr. Humphrey, and myself also. But I'm talking about an average citizen who thought that I was evil because they thought I was a racist, which I am not. And if I had to run a campaign locally in Alabama or nationally against somebody because of race or color, a creed, or religion, or national origin, I would not be a candidate. My religious background just wouldn't allow me to do that.
Because I've always tried to, my folks brought me up to try to be a Christian, and I believe that way. And that's another thing I believe that has been a breakdown in this country, is of young people trying to, they've lost Christianity in their life. They have lost the meaning for God. And I believe God has a very definite place in everybody's life, in political life. This country was founded by Christians. Well, Governor Wallace is a very religious man, and he holds that some of his highest principles are governed by the law of God.
And they didn't all vote for you?
No, sir. I would say that these tremendous crowds in Cobo Hall and Madison Square Garden, the amphitheater in Chicago, that gave us probably the most tumultuous welcome ever given to a presidential candidate, in the final analysis didn't vote for us, but they believed in what we stood for. But even though we didn't win in the number of votes, we did win in that both parties moved toward the middle. Mr. Nixon sounded in his campaign as if his speeches were written in Alabama.
In the end, it was not Wallace who won, but Nixon. Nixon's campaign was the first to employ a professional and dedicated public relations team, which sought to portray a new Nixon, one who was hip and cool, one who had a secret plan to end the Vietnam War.
American youth today has its fringes, but that's part of the greatness of our country. I have great faith in American youth. The youth of today can change the world. And if they understand that, I think that we're going to go forward to a great age, not just for Americans, but for peace and progress for all the people in the world.
But underneath the ad campaigns, he was the same. The war only expanded, and the tactics of repression intensified as Nixon formed his own national version of the sovereignty commissions, who he called the plumbers.
How the world works. For the enemy is not just the communist, it's also the media.
George Wallace remained governor of Alabama until 1987, and he ran for president again in 1972. He looked on his way to win the Democratic nomination, this time talking much more about taxes and welfare cuts instead of states' rights and Anglo-Saxons.
Beaming approval from behind dark glasses, Bremer applauds enthusiastically as Wallace addresses a rally in Silver Spring, Maryland.
His would-be assassin, Arthur Bremer, was clinically insane and actually trying to assassinate Nixon, but couldn't even find the opportunity. Bremer's diary was adapted into a movie, Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver.
Wallace survives the assassination attempt, but his wounds leave him paralyzed, forcing the end of his active campaign.
By the twilight of his political career, Wallace publicly disavowed segregation, appointed black people to positions of power in Alabama, and became a born-again Christian. In 1979, he said, "I was wrong. Those days are over, and they ought to be over."
I loved my father, but I cannot call him back to life. If I were to pretend that he is not dead, I should merely prove myself a coward and a fool, unworthy of his memory and his name.
Lester Maddox. Governor Maddox, how are
Thank you, Chip. Great to be with you.
What an honor to have you.
It's great to be in New York. Great to be alive. Great to be an American. Great to get up out of bed again every morning. Takes me a lot longer, but I still enjoy getting up.
Doing an act with a black man, have you had any comments
It does
about
make
that?
a bit of difference whether black or white or red, yellow, whatever they are.
He's also quite talented.
Yes, I grew up in an integrated neighborhood with black people and worked with them, and they worked for me, and I worked for them.
Well, his name is Bobby Lee Fierce, and ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce the governor and the dishwasher.
All right, thank you very much. Why don't we start off with, thank you very much. Why don't we start off with one about, whoever heard the song Red River Valley, did you? I hope I don't get interrupted. A lot of times I get interrupted. I hope this time I can go all the way through. Hey, Bobby Lee, man, you're behind on tables. They're dirty, the floors are dirty, garbage needs to be carried out. You haven't cut up all the chicken, and you interrupt me while I'm doing my thing. I don't get to do it very often. What's going on?
I want to talk to you right now, Governor.
What is the time and place to talk, friend?
The time is now.
Well, what do you got to talk about? Lay it on.
I'm tired of washing dishes. I'm tired of cutting chicken. Tired of buzzing your tables, mopping your floors, and carrying out your garbage.
Man, you just plain tired. You know if we stop doing all that, you might stop eating.
I never thought about that.
All right, Bobby Lee, we got one other song we'd like to do while we still have time, and it's about the
Governor.
greatest country on earth, the freest, the most beautiful, prosperous country the world has ever known. Your country in mind, the United States of America. Let's do Battle Hymn of the Republic.
I love that song, Governor, and I love this country.
Has seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful light of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
Come on, folks, and go with us here. If you love this country, one of the greatest countries on earth, I don't want to live nowhere else.
Oh, glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Bobby, our time's running short. We've got to be traveling on.